Friends, good evening. Welcome everyone to our pre-chamber lecture series. Tonight we have in store a lecture that is titled Life as a Path to Initiation. The purpose of this lecture is maybe dual. The first one is to show you what is it that life is bringing you as opportunities so that you can capitalize on those and make progress in what is known as the vertical path. The second one is, of course, to invite a little bit of reflection into what our life is, how things are going, the things that do not seem to just go away, the challenges that we face, and also the good things that seem to stick. If we reflect in our life from this perspective, we're going to notice exactly what Samael tells us in this quote, that as a school, life is formidable, but to take it as an end by itself is manifestly absurd. I mean, there are so many good opportunities that we come across to every single day. But if we are too distracted with our beliefs and we are distracted with the way that we have defined ourselves so that we perceive ourselves so that we want others to see us, well, certainly things are going to be a little challenging. Listen, it has been written that the path to initiation is hermetic, that it is secret. Hermetic, well, implies that that you cannot access it, that it is sealed, that it is segregated in a very secure way. And the path to initiation being hermetic and secret, when it comes to our life, it gives us an indication that there are some tests, challenges, ordeals that each and every one of us is going to go through. But those tests have to be experienced internally. As we observe what has been our life collectively, we can see that many of us were grown based on some spiritual, perhaps religious traditions. Many of us, well, we were told that there were some sacrifices that were made by some great men in history. And as those sacrifices took place, well, there was a positive consequence for all of us. And that is true, but that is half true. Those great sacrifices of those great men, they became a good help for us on the way. But there is no such a thing as that the work has been laid out for us and that everything is already said and done. Simply because you have made a decision to accept certain things as truth, to take in the fact that someone died and you have said that that great sacrifice, well, because of that, I accept that, and because that is my Savior, everything has been resolved. Because if we accept this half-truth, evidently there is no progress we're going to be making in life. We're going to need to revolutionize ourselves against the many ideas, the many concepts that we have created about our own selves, so that we can see what is it that we have, what is it that we're missing. We're going to have to come to terms with those good aspects and those unworthy aspects of us, and take everything within us that is unworthy and remove it, eliminate it. After all, there's one thing that you and I and everyone who's listening to this have in common, and it's that we all want to be happy. We're all seeking, striving for happiness, but that happiness is not outside of us. That happiness is not going to be found by listening to such and such pastor, to such and such religious figure, to such and such emotional coach. That happiness is going to come only when we are able to realize there are some specific aspects of us that are holding us back, that are keeping trapped the thing that is truly divine within each and every one of us. And by freeing up that essence, that divine essence that exists in you and me and in each one of us, that it is then that we are going to start making a progress. The great master Jesus, he said, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. People have come to think that this truth is the words that are printed in one of their books, whether it is their version of the Bible, or whether it is some book on psychology or any other book on spirituality. But this truth that the great master of all masters speaks goes beyond anything can be printed. This truth is something that is unknowable from moment to moment. It is something that must be experienced. Look, today, well, we see what happens with us as a collectiveness. There are some good leaders who have a tremendous power of influence, and they will move us, whether it is religiously or economically or politically or socially, and they will say things that resonate well within us, and because we have been seeking for this constant state of happiness, well, we will respond to those things. But the sincere seekers have all come to realize that there is a good payback when we seek to validate all postulates. That there is a win when we seek to investigate. When we stop for a second and suddenly realize that we are being swayed in one direction or another because of our fears or because of our desires. When we investigate, when we allow that divine aspect that exists within us to experience and verify by itself all of these postulates of wisdom, there is an internal revolution that takes place. Today, well, the way that happens is that we will come across a friend, and the friend will share with us some information that may be of interest. It could be information from a local religious group, or it could be information that is of a spiritual nature, etc. But we must not just take that information, read it, digest it, and say, yes, this is what I needed, and only limit ourselves to experience that moment of internal expansion. We have to take that internal expansion and allow it to simply grow. Not just to give us that sense of internal joy, but for this expansion to grow so that we can truly experience what is that we are learning and receiving. Look, in the past, sincere seekers, knowing that there was a need to investigate and experience the truth, they would go through years of development. And at some point, them realizing that there was a longing in their heart and their consciousness, they would present themselves at the doors of the great ancient temples of mysteries. That is similar to what we experience today. We experience that internal expansion, that longing, and we will go to a local group, or we will participate of a local church, etc. But back then, as they knocked on the door, there was a guardian at the door of the temple who would not allow them to walk in at only except those who truly deserved it. And the guardian would ask, who are you? What do you want? What are you seeking? And today, those are three questions that most of us may not be able to eloquently answer. As those seekers would present themselves at the temple and they would walk in, they would be stripped of all of their belongings. every piece of jewelry that they would have, it would be taken away. Not taken away from them, but removed for the purposes of allowing this candidate to walk in and make progress. Symbolizing, well, the removal of that jewelry, the removal of those other garments, as a way to symbolize that this candidate is no longer allowing themselves to be dissuaded, distracted by the many things of the world, by those things that shine with a false splendor. And as they were stripped of those, they were subjected to a series of tests. Those tests were known back then as the tests of the elements. And there were tests of fire, of air, of earth, and water. And those candidates would be exposed to tests of fire, were the resilience, the courage of the neophyte, of the candidate, would be tested by walking them into a room where there would be some physical dangers present associated with the element of fire. And they would have to cross and expose themselves to those hot embers or those hot beams and make it to the other side. In terms of the test of air, what we have come to learn is that many of these candidates were subjected to tests of tremendous willpower, where they would be hanging from the edge of a cliff, holding on to an iron ring, and as they would hold on, there would be strong winds that would sway left and right. Many of them got desperate. Many of them thought they could not. Many of them fell to their death, just as many others burnt to death as well. There were other tests associated with the element of water, where suddenly the candidates saw themselves within the vastness of an ocean, looking in the darkness of the night, to and fro, left and right. And they had to learn to adapt to the circumstance by keeping themselves afloat. Many of them got desperate. Many of them thought that they could not. Many of them perished. And the same thing happened with the test of earth. The candidate would find himself just within two massive bodies of dirt, two mountains, two hills, and they would threaten to crush the student. Many students were able to remain calm. They were able to walk through those paths, flow through those ordeals. But many others got desperate. And in their desperation, what they incited was just the crumbling of these massive formations, and they would be crushed. But today, those tests cannot happen this way. But just as those sincere seekers presented themselves centuries, millennia ago, at the doors of the temple, and were put through those very same ordeals, the same thing happens to us today when we present ourselves at the doors of a church, when we find ourselves holding on to a book that somehow speaks to us, when we come across someone who offers us some good guidance and we feel moved to listen, learn, and to some degree follow. And as we present ourselves to these new opportunities, those very same tests of air and water and earth and fire are given to us today, but they're given to us in a different way. While in the past people received them physically, and many of them perished, the great masters know that, well, miss the opportunity, that soul is going to come back and it's going to have another chance. Well, today, we experience the same test, but we do so in the astral plane. We also experience these things in our daily life. And when it comes to the test of fire, Well, you may have noticed that you may have gone by now through a significant amount of incidents, situations in life where your emotions have been pushed to the very limit. Those fiery emotions, whether it is your anger, your frustrations, etc., they have been ignited and put to the test. And if we have reacted by screaming, by standing up and walking away, by throwing things, by clenching our fists, by having murderous thoughts, violence of the mind, well, evidently we have failed. We allowed ourselves to be burnt with our inferior power, with our inferior emotions. We have allowed that animal fire to consume us, and we have failed. In terms of the test of air, well, how many times has willpower not been necessary in many of the things that you have dealt with, and you have simply given up? Whether it is something as simple as maintaining a healthy diet, and we divert and go back to our bad habits because we cannot maintain that little bit of willpower, or whether it is good willpower to be able to embark in activities that are edifying and dignifying to the consciousness, abandoning bad habits, putting bad practices behind. Well, those are tests of air, where we have to show that we can move, we can navigate, we can develop also the quickness of thought to deal with certain situations. And if we have not done so, well, we have gone through those tests of air. And maybe we keep going through them over and over again. We keep failing them. What happens with a test of water? Suddenly there is a life-changing situation. And now you have lost your job and you realize that you have to move somewhere else. Or your child has to be taken away from one school and put into another. Or suddenly you get sick. Or a family member gets sick. And things have to change. And because things have to change, well, the test of water is asking of us to learn to adapt to the new circumstances. Just like water conforms to whatever shape the container may be in. But if those things happen to us, and instead of flowing with the situation, instead of adapting to the circumstances, we are constantly complaining and rebelling, and we are telling others about how difficult our life is and the challenges that we go, and look how much I have been suffering, and listen to the new thing that happened to me, well, evidently we're failing the test of water. And what can we say about the test of earth? When we come across and we lose a loved one, whether it is one of our children or one of our parents, a good friend, a good neighbor, and the loss itself throws us into a space where our emotions go berserk. And instead of learning to be emotionally stable, we allow ourselves to collapse. And at that moment, we allow our inferior aspects to come through, and we start wondering, why me and why this? And we introvert in such a way where we believe that we are just the center of the universe, and that is failing a basic test on emotional stability. So all of these tests, they still happen to us today. Air, water, earth, and fire. Perhaps you may be going through something right now, today, this week. And we need to learn to demonstrate emotional stability, quickness of thought, the ability to adapt to the circumstances, dominion over all of our inferior passions. Back then, the tests, again, were physical. Many sincere seekers lost their lives. They had to wait until their next opportunity. But today we receive these tests here in the physical plane in a way that is very similar yet different. And we also experience them as we are in the astral plane, when we are in our dreams. So we must learn to investigate But it is not just being curious and looking at different books to make sure that the different books say the same. We have to learn to investigate what is happening within us. We have to learn to investigate why is it that we think the way that we do about so many things? Why is it that we react emotionally to so many things around us? We have to start to investigating why is it that we have the habits that we do? And the best opportunity that we have to do that investigation is taking advantage of the many routines that exist in our life. The routine of life, well, for many of us, life, it's possible that it may have become a little boring. Many of you perhaps have asked yourselves, what is this? Was I supposed to go to school for so many years to be able to work, pay bills, and eventually die? Is this it? Well, that is just the voice of the consciousness letting you know that there is something else. And within that monotony of life, we start seeing that as part of this routine, there are moments of joy and there are moments of despair, there are moments of restlessness. And we have to learn to look at the moments of joy as much as the moments of despair and the moments of restlessness as if they were the same. But that does not mean that joy equals restlessness. That does not mean that restlessness equals despair. No. We have to learn to look at them the same from a contemplative perspective. We have to learn to look at all of these circumstances and understand that we are part of a drama that is repeating itself. That the events that are happening today in our life are events that have happened before, and that now we are experiencing them with their good and with their bad consequences. And as we look at these events, we have to start finding how is it that we react internally and how we exteriorize everything that we are feeling within. And as we look then at the dynamic of our life, we're going to see that as part of this bigger organism that is humanity, well, we tend to thrive in things that are not dignified, that are not essentially constructive. We tend to thrive, well, in our complaints as much as we tend to thrive in feeding and nourishing our ambitions, our greeds. We tend to feel that we're thriving when we are rebelling against external forces, thinking that the problems exist outside of us. And we also seem to thrive in a very illogical and at the same time romantic way with our anger and our violence. Angers that in so many ways sometimes feel as an object to give advice to others. And we say, oh, that would never happen to me, because if it did, what I would do is this. And in reality, when the thing really happens to us, we just don't. As we observe ourselves, we will come to see that there is an internal numbness, an internal, perhaps, rejection to things that are of true value. To such a degree that many people, well, understandably so, they hear anything that has to do with spirituality, anything that has to do with internal growth, anything that has to do with the consciousness. And they roll their eyes and they're not interested, and they prefer just to walk away. I mean, we say, understandably so, because we have been fooled so many times. I mean, there have been so many promises that have been made to us. That if you say these affirmations, things are going to get better. That if you do these boards and you cut and paste little pictures of things, that things will eventually materialize, because after all, you are a creative being and you can work with the forces of attraction of the universe, etc. And we have tried it, and those things, well, they have not necessarily worked. But it is not that they have not worked because they don't work. It is that they have not worked because there are aspects of us that are truly interested in internal revolution, a revolution of the consciousness. There are aspects of us that are truly seeking to make progress, to just break with the way things are because we know that there is something else. But at the same time, there are many psychological aspects within us that for every thought we set in one direction of progress, well, these other aspects speak to you in subconscious and perhaps infraconscious ways, telling you you're not good enough, you don't deserve this, this cannot be real, this is not going to work, you're a fool, etc., etc., etc. And if we have one force going in this direction and 10 or 15 others pulling in other directions, well, it is very difficult to get where that longing is driving us. And that is driven by a mechanicity that exists within our own mind. This mechanicity is induced by our psychological aggregates. And our ego will perceive impressions that will come to it through the senses. But egos of anger will respond to the same triggers consistent and in consistent ways, and will always deliver anger. And our psychological aggregates of pride, whether it is vanity, self-love, self-consideration, it will perceive impressions in its own way, and whenever it feels hurt, vanity will react in the way that vanity reacts. The same thing happens with our lust, with our ambitions, with our greeds. And this is all symbolized alchemically by the moon. Thank you. By the moon. We need to break away with this mechanicity of the moon. And we need to bring the light of the sun. The ancients always venerated the sun, not because they idolized the sun, but rather because symbolically they saw what the sun does for life on earth. As it allows for seeds to sprout within the depth of the earth, it gives us life, it gives us warmth, it gives us color, etc. And seeing how the sun applies internally when it comes to the consciousness as a dawning of an awakening within us, where the sun in itself is a symbol of our Father, a symbol of our spirit. What we truly need to be able to break with that mechanicity of the moon that exists inside each and every one of us, a mechanicity that is very pervasive in our thoughts and in our sentiments and in our habits. And the older we get, the stronger those habits get, the stronger those ideas become, the more crystallized that mind ends up being. What we need is a shock. This is what Psychoanalytic refers to as a shock of consciousness. We need a shock, and this shock has happened to us many times. Perhaps as you go back and retrospect on the experience of your life thus far, you will see that there have been many moments in which you have experienced that It is a shock that comes to you as a moment of awakening, or a shock that comes to you as a moment where you experience the fire of that longing and that internal expansion that tells you, yes, I must do something. And you feel motivated, inspired to go do it. It is a shock that sometimes comes dressed or presented as an apparent tragedy. I mean, how many times you may have not experienced that things were looking so bad, and now in retrospect you go back and you say, you know, that was not that bad. If it had not been for that bad thing that happened, this other good stuff would have not happened. So we need to learn to receive these shocks of consciousness. And what we need today is just another shock. This shock of consciousness gives us the opportunity to realize that we have an opportunity to break away from the horizontal path of life. Because there are two paths in life. There's a horizontal path that we have been walking for only you know how many decades, perhaps how many lives. That horizontal path sounds very much like what we were saying earlier. Do we just go to school for so many years to work, pay bills, and eventually die of old age? That is the horizontal path of life. Waking up every morning to go to work and eventually come home, have the same meals, look at the same TV shows, and go to sleep and go through the same arguments and the same conflicts, regardless of where we are. That is the horizontal path of life. It indicates that there is no progress. And what we are seeking is to disengage from this horizontal path of life and walk onto the vertical path. You will hear us say in many of our Gnostic labs on Thursdays, and also in many other lectures, that it is necessary that we learn to stand at the center of the circle of Tao. When we stand at the center of the circle, if we were to look in one direction, we will be able to see attributes, virtues. And if we look on the opposite side of that circle, we will see the shadow of that virtue. We will see defects. So we will see charity and we will see anger. We will see lust and we will see chastity. We will see acceptance in others. We will see desires, ambitions, etc. When we stand at the center of that circle, we can see opposites and we can learn to reconcile them. And the same thing happens if we stand at the very center of our life, of our presence, of ourselves. If you were able to ground yourself and notice that what has been happening around you is perhaps part of this horizontal path of life, and that there is a direction in which you can embark, where you can start making progress in your level of being. We used to say in our level of morality, but what is moral today is was not moral a few years ago, you see. We start making progress in our level of being as if you were climbing a ladder. This ladder has the ability to take you from the realm of the dense matter, where all these things exist, all the way up to the heights of the realm of the spirit. And this vertical path of life is one that is very challenging. It is very difficult. It is very easy to remain within the difficulties and the comfort of the horizontal path of life. As a matter of fact, there are many students of Gnosis that start making beautiful progress in that vertical path of life, and one day they decide, this is enough for me. And suddenly they disconnect from their friends and their families, or perhaps their studies and their efforts, and they go back to once again a horizontal path of life. Well, that happens to be at a higher level than where they were before, but nevertheless, no more progress. Why is it that the masters tell us that this vertical path is difficult, that it is challenging? Dear friends, it is simply because we have to learn to observe ourselves. We have to learn to see these many unworthy aspects that exist inside each and every one of us. We have to learn to perceive and be there at those moments where we're going through a test of fire and those emotions are starting to boil. And rather than just staying there and on the outside making pretend that everything is fine, and on the inside there's violence and explosions and war, you see, we have to learn to contemplate. How is it that we're thinking? Why are we thinking like this? Why is it that our emotions have gone from that to feeling these dark these dark sentiments, these dark thoughts towards the ones that we are meant to love the most? Which is exactly what happens with anger. Which is exactly what happens when it comes to our lust. And as we see that, well, the more we start understanding ourselves, the more we're given an opportunity to work to eliminate those psychological aggregates. Because inside each and every one of these many defects that we carry within, whether they are positive or negative values, those defects exist because there is a source of consciousness trapped within them That fraction of the consciousness is entirely conditioned by all of these negative experiences that the ego has brought. And we need to free up that consciousness so that it can come back unto itself, so that it can coalesce with the consciousness itself to break away with the mechanicity of nature and start generating its own light. When that consciousness starts becoming radiant, when we work to break the cages of the ego and free the consciousness, that means when we learn to eliminate our anger, and we no longer react to those triggers of anger, not because we are good actors, but because we have eliminated the cause itself. When we break with our ambitions and with our greeds and our envies, our jealousies, etc. As we break those, that consciousness gravitates back towards itself. And as it grows, it starts creating a permanent center of consciousness. And suddenly, there is so much awakened consciousness that has come back onto itself, that consciousness has then the ability to instinctively perceive, comprehend all of the cosmic truths. Suddenly, as that consciousness awakens, you start being able to unfold consciously in your astral body, but not before. As that consciousness starts awakening, faculty of intuition becomes so much more prevalent, so much more dominant than the thinking process of the mind. As a consciousness awakens, as we work with that fire of our Divine Mother to eliminate these defects, and we work with that source of power that exists within us, suddenly faculties like clairvoyance, clairaudience, inspiration, intuition, dominion over the forces of nature come to take place, like all of the great masters are capable of doing. But today, none of the systems created by men have the ability to give you those results. None of this reciting of positive affirmations. If by reciting positive affirmations, would our life would change? Well, life would be so much different. Everybody would be beautiful. Everybody would be rich. Everybody would not be sick, you see? None of these systems created by men have the ability to do that. But the great masters have come to share with us not only what is the reason why we have been caught ourselves within this dense realm of the substance, but the way in which we can walk back that narrow path that is the vertical path, so that we can go back to that long lost Garden of Eden and walk back through the same door that we left. But to make that progress, this is more than just an emotional exercise. This is more than just an intellectual exercise. For us to be able to make that progress, we have to change our level of being. If we do not change our level of being, well, we're going to be like a good actor with new makeup that will create a new impression, but on the inside, things will be essentially the same. And that is the equivalent of that Pharisee in the story of the great master as he was crucified. That Pharisee that symbolizes that internal aspect of us, that on the outside it looks respectable, it looks admirable, it looks wise, but on the inside, well, there is just only ill will. There is only rottenness and filth. And that is not what we are interested in. We are interested in making a radical change. And that radical change allows us to start making progress. And as we make progress, slowly our Divine Mother will continue bringing into our lives new opportunities. Our being will work in such a way that the consciousness will be able to perceive those impulses of the being, and the being will set up some stepping stones in life that will consistently allow you to make progress. And when you make that progress in those into those superior levels of being. On the outside, as the things change, you will know that it is a reflection of the things changing on the inside. And with those new changes, old friends will tend to go away. You no longer share the same values. You no longer share the same ideas. You're no longer stuck in lower patterns of thought, as many others will choose to remain. And because there is a break in that, as you move into a higher level of expression, perhaps we could say a higher level of quote unquote vibration, those old friends will go away. But as those situations change, the new opportunities will create an environment that is even so much more conducive for the internal work to take place. And new opportunities in life will come to you. New friends, new contacts, new ideas, new ways to experience life. All of those slowly moving you in that vertical ladder that is indeed the vertical path of life. So dear friends, this is what we wanted to share with you tonight. Our lecture has been Life as a Path to Initiation. Thank you everyone so much for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.